Just moments ago, a shocking revelation unfolded. Vladimir Medinsky addressed Finnish President Alexander Stubb in a manner that left the latter blushing and speechless. This wasn't merely a diplomatic exchange, it was a pivotal moment that had the potential to reshape relationships between nations. Stay with us until the end of this tale, and you will be astounded by how one man managed to put the leader of an entire country in his place. As Medinsky entered the room, he bore the countenance of someone who commands presence. He stepped in as if he had always belonged there, effortlessly silencing the background noise, which faded like a gentle wave meeting the shore. His impeccably tailored jacket absorbed the light, exuding a composed intensity. The tie, darker than camera-friendly standards suggested, hinted at his preference for engaging with individuals rather than seeking the spotlight. His glasses acted as emotional blinders, not a guise of intellect. Beneath an expressionless facade, every nuance of his tone echoed with gravitas. The Helsinki meeting room was designed to disappear, featuring frosted glass partitions, rugged wood tabletops, and a neutral carpet reminiscent of autumn moss. On the wall hung a photograph of a tiny Finnish harbor, stones of grey, and a nameless boat caught in a slanting rain. Everything around them whispered of civility, the ability to converse even amid storms. It was a place where discussions were crafted, not shouted. President Stubb entered with a subtle urgency, noticeable only to those adept at reading the unspoken. His athletic stride carried the poise of someone sharply in tune with their surroundings. The suit fit as if tailored for a mannequin that had unexpectedly come to life. As he smiled with practiced charm, his eyes flickered nervously, scanning for journalists and assistants. Medinsky observed the scene closely, his voice steady. "Stay focused, Mr. President." The ambient buzz quickly fell silent, acknowledging who had seized control. "I'm glad you're here," he continued, "our discussion centers on simple matters of neighborly relations." Instead of rushing to sit down, Medinsky allowed Stubb the first move. This was not a ceremony but rather an age-old carpentry principle: let the wood bear the weight before you begin to carve. Stubb nodded, inviting the interpreters to join, though soon they would find themselves unnecessary. What began as a conversation in two tongues was swiftly evolving into a singular historical dialogue. A conversation everybody was aware of, yet many pretended to forget. "You recently made statements that turned many heads," Medinsky would say, touching upon parallels few dared acknowledge, regarding a history that offers lessons, should one choose to learn. Glancing out the window, he noticed a city canal where the water patiently embraced the shoreline. This metaphor settled quietly beside them, emblematic of Russia and Finland's relationship. Neighbors are not simply a choice, they are destiny. The president took a breath, adjusting his cuff as if making amends with the fabric itself. He prepared to assert the right of smaller nations to have their voices heard. To speak of impactful alliances and fresh commitments. But Medinsky, with a subtle gesture, requested permission to finish his thought, a concession reminiscent of a teacher instructing a student. "Your words strike me not because they're contentious," he continued, "but because they sever your ties to your own traditions, your very Finnish wisdom. Have you heard the name Kekkonen? Surely you have." He understood a basic truth. Provocation born from ambition is unwise next to a great power. It's far more beneficial to build bridges of interest. There was no hesitation in his tone. In this exchange, it became clear, the dialogue shifted beyond politics into a deeper exploration of relational dynamics. As the discussion progressed, it became evident that this meeting held more than a mere grasp of diplomacy. It was a vital lesson in recognizing shared histories and the wisdom inherent in neighborly respect. In a world growing ever more divisive, the fabric of understanding could act as the cornerstone for a more peaceful coexistence. Thus, a simple meeting morphed into a foundational moment, one that might just illuminate the path forward for nations entwined in a delicate balance of history and future aspirations. A steady parting of perfectly combed hair, a belt gleaming under the soft light, a pocket square folded just so, pure Finnish precision without a shadow of pretense. His smile was measured, crafted with the skill of a chess player executing a calculated castling move. But his eyes told a different story. They darted swiftly from corner to corner, capturing the flash of reporters' phones and ticking off the assistant's checklist with the rhythm of an internal metronome. "Stay on course, don't stray, Mr. President," came the quiet command from Vladimir Medinsky. The ambient murmur shifted, recognizing who had taken control of the moment. "Glad you made time," Medinsky began with calm authority. "Our conversation is about simple things, neighborhood, proximity." He didn't sit first but invited the other to take the seat ahead. This wasn't about protocol, but an old craftsman's trick: let the wood bear its weight before carving begins. Stupp nodded, gesturing toward the translators. They were soon to become mere spectators. What started as a bilingual exchange was soon to merge into a single, historical language, familiar to all, though many pretended to have forgotten it. "You recently spoke words that made many heads turn," Medinsky said, eyes steady, hands away from the folder on the table. "About parallels that aren't truly parallel, about a past that supposedly teaches nothing. It seemed you were in a hurry. In our business, haste is a bad advisor." His glance flickered to the window, where a city canal lay patiently against its shoreline, water yielding to the unyielding bank. That image slipped softly into the room, like a silent third party: Russia and Finland. "Neighbors," he murmured. "And neighbors aren't a choice. They are fate. Fate is not decided by dice." Stupp exhaled quietly, adjusting his cuff as if apologizing to the fabric itself. He opened his mouth, ready to challenge the right of a small nation to voice its opinions, to defend loud alliances and new commitments. But Medinsky raised a hand, a gesture not of power, but like a teacher asking a student to let a thought finish. His voice lowered but sharpened. "Your words struck me, not because they are controversial, but because they cut you off from your own traditions. From a very Finnish wisdom." He leaned forward slightly. "Have you heard the name Kekkonen? I'm sure you have. A man who understood a simple truth. A truth too often forgotten." Nearby a chair seemed to smile politely, as if Kekkonen were merely a museum souvenir. Yet beneath the cheekbones, a tiny muscle twitched, the telltale sign that name carried weight far beyond a face on a banknote. It was a political constitution of an era, alive and unyielding in memory. In the previous segment, the conversation took a serious turn. The speaker gently reminded his Finnish counterpart of the wisdom of history. He mentioned a famous Finnish figure, Kekkonen, emphasizing how vital it is to avoid unnecessary provocations when dealing with powerful neighbors. The atmosphere thickened as he lit upon the changes in geopolitical contexts, suggesting that navigating these waters requires wisdom and respect for shared legacies. With a powerful neighbor, building provocations from ambition is a dangerous game. Instead, it's wiser to forge bridges based on mutual interests. "It's not worth risking your home over a quarrel," he asserted. The sentiment hung in the air, charged with unspoken truths. Underneath the polished veneer of the conversation, a muscle twitched in his companion's jaw. Kekkonen's name loomed large, a reminder of a time when diplomacy was an intricate dance rather than a reckless gamble. "I know you understand the history Finland cherishes," he continued, "but you must recognize that contexts shift." He conveyed this with a shrug, words working like a delicate scale, balancing tradition against the harsh light of current realities. "Geography remains timeless, even as you speak of definitive turns or historical parallels," he added. "You can declare storms the new normal, but fishermen still need safe harbor to return." He paused, letting the silence reverberate within the room, aware that words held their form here, devoid of the constraints of paper. "I mentioned Kekkonen not just for dramatic appeal," he said, "but to remind you how well Finland thrived when respecting the boundaries with neighbors and not shying away from beneficial arrangements. During those prosperous times, Finnish industry flourished, not due to grand rhetoric, but from access to markets and stability." These lessons felt refreshingly applicable, yet disconcertingly simple, raising doubts about their validity in a world that often complicates the obvious. The gaze of the seated president momentarily drifted to a photograph on the wall, a boat amidst the rocks, rain falling gently, a fitting metaphor. Simple insights may seem suspect, but their authenticity often rings truer. When crafting narratives and interviews, a subtle warmth entered his tone. A poignant image emerged, the Marshal studying a map like a surgeon perusing X-rays. You had your own Marshal Carl Gustav, he reflected, a figure of precise ruthlessness, who uttered truths now considered uncomfortable. Did you forget that? Or has someone compelling you to overlook it? The questions hung heavily as silence permeated, inviting contemplation about hidden tensions yet to surface. How far are we willing to stretch our ethical boundaries before they snap? How ingrained are the fears shaped by distance and neglect? These questions swaggered into the room like uninvited guests, leaving an unsettling air in their wake. In an intense dialogue, Vladimir Medinsky subtly wielded his words, forging a sharp narrative around historical perspectives and economic truths. The atmosphere crackled, much like the stillness before a storm. As Medinsky spoke, his voice softened slightly, hinting at the gravity of the conversation and drawing comparisons to a soldier observing battle maps with a surgeon's precision. This evoked memories of Marshal Carl Gustav, a figure not easily referenced in modern discourse due to the political sensitivity that surrounds his legacy. As Medinsky pressed on, he referenced the past's potent influences, questioning if it had been deliberately obscured by distant powers, those who inhabit lands far removed from the nuances of everyday life in the East. His silence spoke volumes, leaving room for everyone to interpret his meaning, often painting the picture with their own fears. You love concepts, Mr. President, he remarked, his tone turned icy mid-sentence. May I present one that may not be avant-garde? Nations that reduce their neighbors to mere abstract figures inevitably place their economies at risk, he argued. Look at Germany, it thrived when it allied with Russia. As trust eroded, so too did prosperity. Echoes of emptied factories now dominate the soundscape instead of the harmonious hum of past success. He shifted his focus, acknowledging the staggering truth: this was not merely an ideological rift. It boiled down to the raw mathematics of energy resources and job losses. Medinsky, aware of the president's hesitation, urged him not to measure discourse with numbers but with values and the lifeblood of existence. Your neighbor is not a product for export, he is a way of life, he asserted firmly. When the topic of framing Russia as a threat arose, Medinsky's gaze intensified. The damage done was not just diplomatic, it shattered the everyday fabric of connection: roads, forests, trade, everything intertwined in community and livelihood. The people in their northern cities understood the price of peace better than any blanket statements. He held the folder tighter, emphasizing that the real matter at hand went beyond ink on paper. I have a favorite saying, he teased, withholding its content but implying its weight. You are wiser than your slogans, Mr. President, he continued. He sensed the room's tension morphing as he pressed forward. You've studied in esteemed institutions, possess the wisdom of languages, and know the scent of archives. It's disheartening to see someone of your intellect yield their decisions to distant forces. Each word dripped with a velvet steeliness, cutting through the air, charging the space with a palpable intensity. Tensions fluctuated like a pendulum, and the air thickened with unspoken truths, casting an undeniable shadow over the encounter. Would the allure of history's lessons resonate, or would entrenched ideologies prevail? Medinsky prepared for the next move, knowing that this maneuver could shift the course of their discourse dramatically. In a recent powerful exchange, two leaders found themselves at the crossroads of history. Vladimir Medinsky confronted Finland's President Alexander Stubb with words so striking that they left him visibly shaken and speechless. This was not just a diplomatic conversation, it was a crucial moment that could redefine the relationship between nations. Stay tuned to discover how one individual managed to challenge a head of state, changing the course of dialogue forever. As Medinsky entered the room, his presence commanded attention. He moved through the space with the confidence of someone who belonged there. His jacket fitted flawlessly, fabric softly absorbing the light, and his tie, slightly darker than expected, hinted at a serious tone rather than showmanship. His glasses served not just as a frame for intellect, but as a barrier against overly emotional responses. The atmosphere in the Helsinki meeting room was serene, designed to promote calm deliberation. The blend of creamy glass partitions and muted autumn-inspired carpets created a setting that felt both formal and intimate. This was a place that assured civility, a place where even in the midst of turmoil, clarity could emerge. President Stubb entered hastily, embodying a blend of urgency and poise. His tailored suit screamed perfection, yet his eyes darted around, reflecting a hidden anxiety beneath the surface. He seemed to carry the weight of the moment, acutely aware of the historical significance of their encounter. "You've recently made remarks that turned quite a few heads," Medinsky began, the words hanging heavy in the air. Without opening any documents, he delved into interpersonal territory, emphasizing the bonds forged by geography, Russia and Finland as neighbors, not adversaries. As the dialogue progressed, Medinsky posited a stark warning: rushing often leads to poor judgment. He noted the metaphorical river flowing through their shared history, one that required careful navigation. He reminded Stubb of the wisdom of their predecessors, evoking the name Kekkonen, a Finnish leader who understood the art of diplomacy well enough to build bridges rather than walls. "It's essential to grasp the lessons of history," Medinsky urged, his voice steady yet firm. "To ignore the past is to gamble recklessly with the future." The tension in the room thickened as Stubb considered these points. Silence fell momentarily, a pause that felt almost palpable, as if the weight of their dialogue hung like freshly fallen snow on ice, ready to give way to future footsteps. "No one can choose their neighbors, but we can certainly choose the tone of our conversations," Medinsky maintained, his gaze unwavering. Stubb took a moment, letting the words settle. It was a rare moment of introspection for a leader often portrayed as decisive. "Let me remind you," Medinsky continued, almost whispering for emphasis, "the choices of today dictate the life of the future." He emphasized that every decision made reverberated through time, shaping not only political landscapes but everyday lives. Stubb clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of these statements. "I hear you, but we have obligations," he finally replied, trying to defend his position amidst the gathering storm of dialogue. "Obligations don't excuse forgetfulness," Medinsky countered, a steel threading through his words. "You owe it to your people not just to tell them of grand alliances but to deliver practical solutions that can weather any storm." He leaned back slightly, signaling it was Stubb's turn, yet the air crackled with the energy of unresolved tension. Medinsky's final remark lingered, heavy with meaning, as they both contemplated the true essence of leadership, balancing national identity with global responsibility. What decisions would be made? What truths left unspoken would resonate in the hearts of their citizens? The outcome of this critical meeting lay still ahead, like a boat set adrift on a calm yet uncertain sea. 5 minutes ago, a shocking revelation emerged. Vladimir Medinsky reminded the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, of certain words that left him blushing and speechless. This was no ordinary diplomatic exchange, it was a truth moment capable of redefining the relationships between nations. Stay tuned to the end of the story, and you'll be astounded by how one man managed to put a leader of an entire country in his place. Vladimir Rostislavovich entered the room with an air of assuredness, as if he belonged there all along. He moved smoothly, his presence quieting the atmosphere like waves retreating from a well-formed shore. His suit fit impeccably, the fabric absorbing light rather than reflecting it, emphasizing his composed demeanor. His tie was a shade deeper, a deliberate choice meant for the conversation rather than the camera. Everything about him radiated a quiet intensity, and his glasses served as a barrier against unwanted emotions. His voice carefully crafted phrases, as if he were not addressing a high office but a student preparing for an important examination. The Helsinki meeting space was designed to be unnoticeable: frosted glass, rough wood tables, a neutral carpet resembling autumn moss. A photograph of a quaint Finnish harbor adorned the wall, its calm waters whispering that civility permeated the air. Here, voices were composed rather than raised. The Finnish president entered with a hint of urgency, betraying only those who knew to look for it. Alexander Stubb walked with a brisk athleticism, his suit tailored perfectly. Yet, his lively eyes darted around, scanning for every possible distraction: phones, checklists, nearby journalists, each fleeting detail marking an unyielding inner tempo. "Maintain your focus, Mr. President," Medinsky instructed, and the ambient hum of the room shifted, acknowledging the shift in control. "Glad you found the time. Our discussion is about simple matters concerning our neighborly relations. Medinsky allowed Stubb to sit first, a move of strategic patience, suggesting that the weight of the conversation would settle before any words were carved into it. The conversation began in two languages but would soon flow into a single historical one, revealing familiar yet often obscured truths. Recently, your words caused quite a stir, Medinsky asserted, avoiding any physical files, transforming the meeting into a conversation rather than a debate. Subtle references to historical events shaped the atmosphere, with Medinsky recalling the wisdom of Kekkonen, who understood that building provocations was futile next to a powerful neighbor. After all, one should construct bridges from interests rather than pile up ambitions, he emphasized, making it clear that diplomacy should prioritize coexistence over conflict. As he leaned back slightly, pondering his next words, he left Stubb in the uncomfortable silence that often accompanies profound realizations, where every breath felt heavy with the weight of history. The room held its breath, the soft creak of a chair resonating like a heartbeat. Would the president rise to the occasion, or would he remain ensnared in political posturing? The tension spun webs of uncertainty. And there was Medinsky's cutting reminder that neighbors cannot merely choose to ignore the past, they must navigate it with care, kindness, and a vision for mutual benefit. Tea was served, an ordinary protocol gesture. Yet, the clinking of fine china sounded sharper, marking a transition. Nonsense and bravado would soon give way to the sharp realities of cooperation. The translators exchanged glances, realizing that this wasn't a performance predicated on farce but an intense exploration of consequences. Medinsky leaned forward, his voice adjusting to the solemnity of the moment. We are not here to issue lessons but to remind you. In places where memory fades, confusion always reigns. It became evident that the real dialogue about neighborly relationships required more than mere acknowledgement. It called for an awakening of memories long overshadowed by comfort or neglect. The warmth of the tea served as a tangible reminder that while power might dictate encounters, warmth fosters understanding. The room quieted, anticipation hanging thick in the air, and one could almost sense the collective question, would this meeting emerge as a turning point or a mere footnote in the vast history of diplomatic exchanges? In the heart of Helsinki, tension hung like a storm cloud in a clear sky. Amidst the silence of an important diplomatic meeting, two men faced off not just as representatives of their nations, but as two forces in a struggle that could reshape alliances. Vladimir Medinsky, with a sharply tailored jacket absorbing the light, effortlessly commanded the room. Alexander Stubb, the Finnish president, appeared poised but was internally grappling with every word exchanged. What happens when a nation forgets its past? Medinsky's voice broke the silence, rippling through the air like a warning bell. The unease in the room intensified as he continued, in places where memory is absent, chaos reigns. He held up a steaming cup of tea, embodying the comfort of age-old wisdom. Let us not turn off the light of memory, it's far cheaper than anger. A shift in atmosphere, the air thickened with silent contemplation, punctuated only by the light creak of shifting chairs and the barely audible breaths of the two leaders. Stubb struggled for his footing beneath the weight of history and expectations. The expectations of nations hung heavier than the autumn clouds drifting outside. His words finally broke through after what felt like an eternity. Your words are filled with stories, Stubb declared cautiously. But history is just that, the past. Medinsky raised his gaze, his lips twitching ever so slightly, a flicker of a smile that danced just out of reach. History is a foundation, he countered, his tone a mix of warmth and steel. Without it, the future collapses faster than a house of cards in a draft. There was a moment of reckoning, Stubb's response faltered. Why cling to the ghosts of history when faced with the limitless potential of the future? Yet Medinsky pressed on, holding the floor with palpable serenity. Your nation thrived while respecting its neighbors, understanding that power lies not in conflict, but in cooperation. The words struck deep, their implications echoing through the silence like thunder. Stubb's impulse was to reject these claims, to uphold Finland's independence. But how could he dismiss a truth so blatantly evident? Memories of past conflicts flashed like fragmented images in his mind, commanders who had understood the essence of resilience. Your country has lived for decades in peace and development by honoring your proximity to Russia, Medinsky pressed on. This is not about humiliation, it's about practicality. Urho Kekkonen knew this. Stubbs' moment of hesitation, amplified by Medinsky's calm assertiveness, weighed heavily in the air. Each word seemed to push him further into a corner, rendering him breathless with questioning uncertainties. Why repeat borrowed words? Medinsky's voice lowered, ice forming in the warmth of the conversation. You find yourself retreating to the vocal fringes, avoiding the echoes of your own internal thoughts. The room held its breath as Medinsky's eyes bored deep into Stubbs. Think of your generals, those who fought against the Soviet Union, who recognized the strength in acknowledging a formidable neighbor. His tone sharpened. Conflict is always a defeat hiding behind a facade of victory. A palpable tension enveloped the conversation as history clashed with ambition. Could Stubb find the words to counter Medinsky's challenge, or would he succumb to the weight of his own unspoken truths? As the dialogue continued, the stakes grew even higher. Could either leader bridge the chasm between acknowledgement of the past and the aspirations for the future? In this exchange, every pause became a battleground, each glance a weapon as two nations stood at the edge of a new chapter, waiting to see whose narrative would prevail. Just moments ago, a startling revelation sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. Vladimir Medinsky confronted Finland's President Alexander Stubb with words so piercing that Stubb visibly flushed, silenced, unable to respond. This was more than a formal exchange, it was a reckoning that could redefine the future of their nations. Stay with this story to witness how one man's unyielding truth shattered the facade of political posturing, leaving a president no choice but to face reality. Previously, Medinsky's voice had softened yet sharpened to steel as he reminded the room of Finland's own marshal, an unforgiving tactician who warned about the price of conflict with Russia. Their archives held his candid words, war is always a loss, even if victory is claimed. Those generals knew respect for Russia's strength came not from fear, but from bitter experience. This memory hung between them, thick as dust from old files, reminding all present of the hard lessons forgotten too easily. But now, Alexander Stubb leaned back, his diplomatic armor wavering, uncertainty flickering beneath calm eyes. We cannot ignore our allies, he finally said, voice steady but edged with tension. We have obligations. Medinsky's reply was gentle, but loaded. Obligations to whom? He asked softly. To those across the ocean, far from these shared forests and lakes? Medinsky's words lingered, weighing heavily between them. Or to your own people, families who brace every winter for warmth and steady work in factories nearby? Your distant allies offer slogans, promises that look good on banners. But they do not deliver cheap gas. They do not open markets 1,000 kilometers from Helsinki. They won't share your forests or your lakes. We will. He paused, sipping tea with casual ease, as if recounting history rather than threatening futures. Germany once bet on slogans too, turning away from practical ties. Look where they are now, factories silent, economy shrinking. Not long ago, Europe's powerhouse. All because they thought they could do without their neighbor. Do you want Finland to follow the same path? Stubb remained silent, caught in the weight of truths harder to fight than headlines. His sharp arguments dissolved like wet paper, powerless here. Mr. President, Medinsky concluded, I do not suggest surrender. I offer reason. We are neighbors, we were neighbors 100 years ago, and we will be 100 years from now. You can't pick your neighbors. But you can choose how to live with them, through peace and mutual benefit, or through conflict and loss. He placed his teacup down so softly that the clink echoed louder than his words. Stubbs' face flushed again, his practiced smile faltered, a fragile mask slipping as understanding dawned. The room fell silent, no longer tense with anticipation, but heavy with reluctant admission. Outside, Helsinki's twilight draped the city like a velvet shawl. Street lamps flickered on, but inside the meeting room, the light remained cold and strict, as if the very air demanded clarity, no illusions, no evasions. The future of two nations now hung on a fragile thread, trembling between old grudges and new possibilities. What would Stubb choose? As the atmosphere in the room shifted, the silence deepened, not from anticipation, but from acknowledgement. Evening gently enveloped Helsinki, akin to a soft fur shawl draping over shoulders. Outside, streetlights flickered to life, while inside the negotiation room, the air remained rigid and chilly, demanding utmost clarity. Vladimir Rostislavovich slightly leaned back, fingers intertwined on his knees. He embodied the calm of someone unhurried, accustomed to the rhythms of long archival nights, sifting through time-worn documents peppered with dust and intrigue, each bearing the weight of future consequences. Across from him sat Alexander Stubb, rigid and precise, as if he were crafted for the lens of a camera that wasn't there. In this discourse, it was only the words that mattered, weighty enough to either redeem or shame. "You mentioned obligations," Medinsky began softly, each syllable carefully measured. "I comprehend, but obligations transcend mere signatures on paper. They weave invisible threads to your homeland and to the constituents who chose you. They expect muted phrases that herald a tranquil existence." Stubb tilted his head, a flicker of desire to retort crossing his face. Yet, wisdom prevailed, each utterance could turn against him. "Do you know what your Marshal Mannerheim remarked?" Medinsky continued, his tone sharpening like cold steel. He acknowledged the Soviet Union's might, aware that no Western alliance could save a small nation if it resisted its formidable neighbor. Such words were not propaganda, they were the truth of a man who had witnessed conflict firsthand. Stubb tensed slightly, familiar with the uncomfortable quotes that shattered the narrative of a small yet proud Finland, an image often flaunted in Europe. "But times have changed," he asserted, striving to instill confidence in his voice. "Times may change," Medinsky nodded in agreement. "Yet geography remains static. Your country will not relocate on the map. You still share a vast border with Russia. Hence, you remain intrinsically tied to the stability of that frontier. If today you dare to tug on the tiger's whiskers, as your own Kekkonen once advised, tomorrow may reveal that the tiger doesn't heed your growl. And the price for that oversight could be extraordinarily steep." There was no menace in his words, only an unsettling reality. In that moment, truth resounded louder than any proclamation. How long would he allow the illusion of comfort to blind him? The stakes were rising, and with them, the need for clear, decisive action. The air thickened with anticipation. What would happen when the roles reversed, and Finland found itself at the mercy of forces beyond its control? A stunning turn of events unfolded just minutes ago. Vladimir Medinsky confronted Finland's president, Alexander Stubb, with words that left him speechless. This was not merely a diplomatic exchange but a pivotal moment that could redefine the relations between nations. Stay tuned, because you won't believe how one man challenged the president of an entire country. Picture this: Vladimir Medinsky strides into the room with an air of quiet confidence, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. His tailored suit hugged his frame perfectly, the fabric absorbing the light, emphasizing his composed demeanor. As he entered, the room fell into a hush, like waves calming at the right shore. His voice resonated with authority, commanding the attention of all present. The setting was a Helsinki conference room where even architecture seemed to play coy, allowing meaningful dialogue to flow unimpeded. A delicate balance hung in the air as President Stubb entered with youthful haste. His every movement spoke of energy, yet his eyes darted nervously, revealing a deeper tension. "Mr. Stubb," Medinsky began, "the words you mentioned recently turned many heads." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle like fog over the waters outside. The metaphor whispered of the complex relationship between Russia and Finland. "You see, neighbors are not merely a result of circumstance, they are destiny." Stubb attempted to respond, but Medinsky's unwavering gaze silenced him. "You hurry," Medinsky continued, "but haste is a poor advisor. You're risking your home on a gamble." Medinsky tapped his fingers lightly on the table, each gesture compact yet potent, like a tightly coiled spring ready to unleash. "Let's touch on history," Medinsky pressed, an edge of intensity sharpening his voice. "Do you remember Kekkonen?" The name hung in the air, and for a moment, both men seemed to drift back in time. He understood that alongside a great power, it's better to build bridges of collaboration rather than walls of provocation. Suddenly, the subtlety of diplomacy shifted. Ignoring this wisdom, he continued, creates a rift that leads to a rocky future. And the storm is brewing, Mr. President. Stubb clenched his jaw, tension rippling through the room. Was it a warning or an observation? I am not threatening you, Medinsky clarified, his tone steady. But remember, your history is fragile. Do not trample it under the weight of outside interests. His voice dropped to a near whisper, echoing with sincerity. Your narrative is too valuable to be neglected or rewritten. Silence enveloped the gathering, each tick of the clock accentuating the gravity of this moment. The air thickened, burdening Stubb with the weight of choice. Would he reconsider his stance, or would he allow the narrative to continue on a perilous path? Their eyes locked in a battle of wills, the question lingered, in the face of history and circumstance, whose truth would prevail? Can choices made today alter the fate of nations tomorrow? A thought-provoking question hung in the air like dense fog. What values truly matter in a world fraught with shifting loyalties? The room fell silent, and all eyes were on Vladimir Medinsky, as he turned to the Finnish president, Alexander Stubb. Medinsky's intensity was palpable. He wasn't merely addressing a senior politician, he was dissecting the fragile relationship between nations. His tone dipped into a well of concern as he asked, which values sustain peace? The value of memories? The simple life of an ordinary person seeking light at dusk and bread at dawn? Stubb clenched his jaw but remained quiet. I'm not asking you to forsake your choices, Medinsky continued, leaning forward, his voice lowering as if to share a secret. I urge you to remember, your history is too fragile to be laid at the feet of foreign interests. Russia, not anyone else, will always be your neighbor. We are not going anywhere, we won't evaporate or disappear. His words hung heavy, a stark reality. Neighbors are not chosen, they are the ones with whom you share bread and water. With whom you make deals that sustain your people. With whom you build roads that do not tear at borders. With whom you can argue but cannot live in perpetual strife. Medinsky captured the moment perfectly. Kekkonen understood this. Your marshals knew this too. But do you? The question lingered, demanding no immediate answer, just the raw honesty that Stubb struggled to confront. The Finnish president averted his gaze, retracing it to the photograph of a tiny boat, stones, and rain on the wall. A simple image that masked a profound truth he feared to acknowledge. Medinsky fell silent, knowing his rhetoric had landed where it mattered most. In that instant, the unspoken truth became evident. The debate was lost, not because one had spoken last, but because Medinsky's insights were inescapable. Later that evening, as the official meeting concluded, the press reported a stark, measured statement. The parties had discussed bilateral relations and regional security. No details, no hints of conflict. Yet, those present knew they had witnessed more than dialogue, it was a collision of worldviews. Medinsky returned to the hotel late, his demeanor focused, not fatigued. His steps were deliberate, akin to a man carrying freshly forged thoughts, eager to organize them into clarity. His Scandinavian-style room, with its cold wood and blank white walls, offered little distraction. On the desk lay a map of Finland, marked with notes, awaiting further contemplation. Just moments before, a startling development unfolded. Vladimir Medinsky delivered words to Finland's president, Sauli Niinistö, that flustered him beyond measure. This was no routine diplomatic exchange but a pivotal confrontation that could redefine centuries-old ties between two nations. Stay with me as we unravel how one man humbled an entire presidency with a few carefully chosen phrases. Earlier, Vladimir Rostislavovich paced a room styled in stark Scandinavian minimalism, cold wood, plain white walls, utterly devoid of decoration. On the desk lay a map of Finland, peppered with meticulous notes. He traced his finger along the eastern border, where forests and lakes serpentine the land like a living thing. Neighbors are not a choice, he murmured to himself, but those we must live beside. A fleeting image of Ninisto's face flickered in his mind, so precise, so controlled, yet marred by a slight flush that betrayed the unspoken truth. His carefully crafted arguments were unraveling under foreign scrutiny. From his briefcase, Vladimir extracted several copies of archival documents. These weren't weapons but shields, quotations from marshals, notes from negotiations during Kekkonen's era, records of how Finland carved its autonomy within the Russian Empire. "They think history's merely the past," he whispered. "But history's a mirror reflecting today." Folding the papers gently, as if confirming their power was intact, he realized the debate was far from over, it had only just begun. Outside, dusk descended over the distant port, the low hum of ships cutting through the night's silence like a steady drumbeat, waking memories. Peace is not forged in newspapers or TV studios, but here, where two neighbors share a common shore. Tomorrow's conversation awaited. The following morning defied expectations. No coffee, no headlines, just a brisk walk. Vladimir preferred mornings outdoors. It gathered his thoughts, sharpening clarity like the cool northern air itself. Helsinki was tranquil then, its streets empty, the scent of fresh bread weaving down from a corner bakery, life unfolding in slow, measured breaths. Politics might not exist here, but the fragility of peace? It hung palpably in the cold air. This city knew all too well the cost of noise, how grand gestures and foreign ambitions could crumble the delicate balance of neighborly trust. Vladimir moved deliberately, eyes dancing over facades and glowing windows. Each step echoed a question: how long can this fragile truce hold? What happens when ambition overrides quiet understanding? The wind whispered answers, but they weren't comforting. Could a single conversation reshape centuries of tension? And more importantly, who holds the power when words become weapons sharper than steel? The story unfolds with unsettling truths and quiet revelations, because sometimes, the neighborliest words carry the heaviest weight. A shocking moment unfolded in a conference room where two powerful leaders confronted each other. Vladimir Medinsky, representing Russia, stood tall. He faced Finland's President Alexander Stubb, who felt a wave of discomfort wash over him. Their discussion wasn't just about polite diplomacy, it was a confrontation with the potential to redefine the relationship between their countries. Medinsky reminded Stubb of the weight of history, saying, "Do you value new declarations with distant allies more than good neighborliness with those sharing your land?" Medinsky spoke with a calm intensity that drew in the listeners. "Politics may be a game for you," he continued, "but for the fishermen, farmers, and workers out there, it's about reality. They need markets for their goods, warmth in their homes, a promise that tomorrow won't bring war." He fixed his gaze on Stubb, the silence of the room growing heavy. What truly matters for Finland? New alliances far across the ocean, or understanding those just across the river? Stubb, taken aback, hesitated. His advisors shuffled uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the tension. "Russia is a complicated neighbor," he began, but Medinsky's expression remained unyielding. "You talk of allies who don't know your winters," he countered, "who cannot replace those who share your soil." The legacy of Finland's former president, Kekkonen, hung in the air: never quarrel with a great neighbor, never act against their interests. Each word struck Stubb like a hammer against an anvil. His expression tightening with the realization of how these truths echoed into the present. And then Medinsky sharpened the focus. "Look at Germany," he warned, "a nation that chose slogans over pragmatism, and now? Their economy crumbles, factories shut down, and the people suffer." The room fell silent, the weight of Medinsky's words resonating, drowning out any attempts to retort. Even the faint crackling of wood in the fireplace seemed to echo the tension, as if the very walls anticipated Stubb's response. As Medinsky leaned closer, he set the stage for his final point. "Your rhetoric is often fueled by emotions and scarce in strategy. Where would Stubb go from here? What would he reveal in the face of such stark reality?" As the air thickened, the question loomed: could Stubb align his vision with the unforgiving truths of history, or would he cling to the fading promises of distant alliances? In a tense diplomatic meeting, Vladimir Medinsky delivered pointed truths that left Finnish President Alexander Stubb speechless. Medinsky underscored the importance of pragmatism in statecraft, emphasizing that emotions alone cannot build a nation. As history loomed over them, he recalled Finland's past prosperity due to its relationship with the Soviet Union, a stark contrast to its current struggles with factory closures and job losses. The sentiments hung in the air, heavy with undeniable truths. The silence stretched, so palpable that one could almost hear the crackling of logs in a fireplace, a relic more decorative than functional. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath, awaiting a continuation of the challenging dialogue. Medinsky's unwavering gaze fixed on his counterpart as he resumed speaking. Your words contain too much emotion and too little calculation. Yet, a state is built on practicality and mutual benefit, he asserted. He spoke of Finland's past flourishing through collaboration with its formidable neighbor, a fact that stood stark against today's economic decline. Look at the number of factories closing. How many citizens are fleeing to find jobs in other lands? This is the price of your new direction. To his left, a presidential advisor lifted his eyes momentarily but remained silent, knowing the weight of Medinsky's words. You may wish to ignore history, he pressed on, but it is relentless in calling for recognition. He shared a haunting revelation from archives, words from Finnish commanders during the war, acknowledging that any resistance to the Soviet Union was futile, and peace was the only way forward. These were not the voices of strangers, they belonged to Finland's own heralded figures. Stubb's fingers drummed nervously against the table, a visible sign of mounting tension. The potential rebuttals he considered dwindled under the gravity of Medinsky's assertions. Medinsky meticulously emphasized that it was Russia that gifted Finland its parliamentary system, currency, and the autonomy to exist within the empire. To forget this for the sake of outside interests is to betray your own history, he declared, his tone stern. A pregnant silence enveloped the room, thickening the atmosphere as the Finnish president diverted his gaze, lost in thought while observing the dimming lights of the city outside. The reality dawned on him, the debate was lost, the truth unfurling in its stark simplicity. I heard you, he responded after what felt like an eternity. Yet the final decision rests with us. Medinsky inclined his head, acknowledging his opponent's sentiments. Of course, remember this, decisions made against neighbors often come back to haunt one's own gardens. His statement hung like a sentence, delivered not with hostility but with an unsettling assurance. It was in that moment a realization washed over, history had reasserted its presence, and no declarations could silence that truth. The tension in the air was a vivid reminder that while alliances might shift, the past remains a powerful guide and a relentless arbiter of future paths. In the wake of a powerful diplomatic meeting, the hallways of the aged building buzzed with hurried footsteps. Advisors sprinted to their vehicles, some spoke rapidly into phones, while journalists prepped their questions. Yet, a single shadow lingered in the eyes of those emerging from the conference room, a shadow of undeniable truth, muffled by no press releases. Vladimir Rostislavovich strode with unwavering confidence, his demeanor betraying no sign of fatigue despite the intensity of the dialogue. He appeared less like a debater and more like an instructor, satisfied with his delivery. Outside, evening light fell in golden shards, cold yet captivating. In front of the parliament, crowds gathered, some armed with placards, others merely intrigued. They sensed the weight of significance in the air. Among them was a young journalist who squeezed through the masses and posed a question. Mr. Medinsky, can we say the conversation with the President of Finland was tough? Medinsky halted, locking eyes with the reporter. His gaze was calm, yet resolute. Tough? No. Honest, yes. Sometimes, truth strikes an unforgiving chord simply because it's been withheld too long. The words resonated, instantly captured by dictaphones and cameras. The journalist, still processing the moment, felt that he had witnessed a turning point, where diplomacy transcended mere protocol to become a direct lesson in history. Meanwhile, in a nearby chamber, President Stubb sat with his advisors, his face taut, cheeks flushed. He removed his glasses and placed them on the table, whispering. He reminded me of what we often prefer to forget. silence enveloped the room. The advisors understood that disputing fact was futile. This quiet, punctuated only by the clink of porcelain against coffee cups, conveyed a vivid realization. Finland had, perhaps for the first time in a long while, confronted a history it had sought to erase. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Helsinki, the old town buzzing as if the city itself were debating the outcomes of the meeting. In this charged atmosphere, a realization emerged: decisions made against neighbors often backfire. This sentiment hung heavily in the air, a verdict pronounced not with hostility, but with cold confidence. History had reasserted its presence, a voice that no declaration could silence. As the meeting concluded, footsteps reverberated through the echoing corridors of the ancient structure. Advisors rushed towards their vehicles, voices weaving in short, clipped phrases into their phones, while journalists readied their queries. But among those exiting the negotiation rooms lingered a single, immutable shadow, the shadow of unarguable truth that no press release could suppress. Vladimir Rostislavovich strode forward, exuding a steady confidence. His pace was unruffled, radiating a sense of triumph rather than weariness, as if he had just delivered an eloquent lecture rather than engaged in tense discourse. The satisfaction of articulating everything necessary was evident on his face. Outside, the last light of day fractured into a golden chill. In the square outside the parliament, small groups began to gather, some with placards, others out of curiosity. They were unaware of the intricate details but had a visceral understanding that something significant was at stake. A young journalist, eager for insight, pushed closer and asked, "Mr. Medinsky, can we characterize your discussion with the Finnish president as tough?" Medinsky paused, his composure unyielding as he met the reporter's gaze directly. "Tough," he mused. "No, honest, yes. The truth often sounds harsh simply because it has been long unspoken." Immediately, the journalist captured the moment, his recorder whirring as he observed Medinsky's exit. He sensed he was no longer witnessing mere diplomacy, he was observing a shift, a moment where diplomacy transformed from a formality into a concrete lesson in history. Meanwhile, within the adjacent building wing, President Stubb sat among his advisors. The tension was palpable, and his cheeks burned with embarrassment. He removed his glasses and set them on the table, speaking softly. "He reminded me of things we often strive to forget." A contemplative silence fell. His advisors, recognizing the weight of the facts presented, absorbed the moment. The soft clinking of coffee cups echoed in the quiet, capturing the gravity of the day. Finland had, perhaps for the first time, confronted its historical narratives once again. That evening, the wind swept through the narrow boulevards of Helsinki, blending with whispers as if the very streets were engaged in discussion about the day's revelations. Vladimir, a seasoned diplomat, stepped out of his hotel into a city still waking up. The early morning streets were quiet, and the faint glow from office windows illuminated the dawn. That hour revealed the city stripped of vibrant displays, raw and unrefined, just as its ordinary citizens saw it. Discreetly, he moved through the throngs, his figure commanding attention despite his effort to blend in. His coat was buttoned up, footsteps soft, gaze fixed on a distant horizon rather than the storefronts around him. He navigated the streets like someone who owned the moment, neither hurried nor anxious, yet enough to draw glances from passers-by. At the market square, vendors were busy laying out crates filled with apples and fish. The air was imbued with the scent of freshly baked bread, mixed with salt and the chill of the sea. Vladimir paused, observing the everyday rituals of common folk preparing for their day. He thought about a simple truth that echoed louder than any debate: people need peace and work, not foreign slogans. Meanwhile, across the street, President Stubb was in his office overlooking the port, his face tense and weary. His advisors reported fresh updates and recounted the news, but he was only half listening, lost in thought. The words of Medinsky resonated in his mind like a tolling bell: neighbors can't be chosen. This mantra gripped him, surfacing every time he glanced at the map of Finland on his wall. The eastern border stretched long, inescapable and unyielding. As Medinsky returned to his hotel, he flipped through yesterday's notes in his notepad, recognizing them as the prelude to something greater. Today's discussions would be even more challenging, yet the seed of change had been sown. Even whispered truths had a way of taking root. A smile crossed his face as he murmured, "History can be forgotten, but it cannot be erased." Later that evening, once the official protocols had been signed and journalists departed, a rare silence engulfed Helsinki. The city seemed to digest what had transpired. Vladimir sat in his hotel room, gazing at the distant city lights. His notepad now contained conclusions he felt compelled to voice aloud. He recalled the faces he had encountered, tense, flushed, sometimes bewildered. This marked a pivotal moment, not just in diplomacy, but in the understanding of shared histories and responsibilities. What happened next would shock both leaders. But was it truly a conversation, or merely the calm before a storm? How would history remember these moments? These thoughts lingered as he prepared for the challenges ahead, understanding that sometimes, the most crucial discussions are those that remain unsaid. The city of Helsinki seemed to digest what it had just heard. Vladimir Rostislavovich sat quietly in his hotel room, eyes fixed on the glowing cityscape beneath him. In his hands, the familiar notebook now held more than scribbles, it held conclusions that demanded to be spoken aloud. Faces flashed through his mind, tense, flushed with embarrassment, sometimes utterly lost. He recalled phrases that had echoed through the meeting room, words so sharp and undeniable that even the proudest ears could not ignore them. The lesson had been delivered. Once again, Russia reminded its neighbors that history is neither a toy nor a tool for propaganda. It is the very foundation beneath the tallest walls, the backbone of enduring sovereignty. Presidents Kekkonen and Mannerheim understood this deeply. Even the humble fishermen and farmers of Finland knew one thing: life thrives only where peace with one's neighbor exists. Today's exchange was a stark reminder of that truth. The words spoken left a mark so profound, no headline can wash them away. Moved by the weight of it all, Medinsky closed his notebook, rose, and moved to the window. Outside, the port shimmered under the night sky. Ships slipped away and returned, following a rhythm as old as time itself. This image spoke volumes, simple, yet vital. The world constantly shifts, but the bond of neighbors remains unbroken. He murmured to himself, neighbors may not be chosen, but peace is always a choice. Those words were meant not only for those in the room but for every listener beyond these walls. This story, carried by these words, is a call to remember history honestly and to live in harmony with those next door. When faced with the past, will we learn or forget? Will we let old grudges guide us, or can we build a future founded on understanding and respect? Only together can we preserve memory and craft a world where peace holds more power than conflict. In the stillness of a hotel corridor, where the soft glow juxtaposed against the echoing footsteps of vigilant guards, Vladimir Rostislavovich reflected on the words exchanged earlier that day. He sat by his room's window, pen in hand, jotting down thoughts on paper rather than typing away on a screen. Each handwritten letter seemed to crystallize the weight of the day's discussions. Keywords danced in his mind: Kekkonen, Mannerheim, memory, geography, Germany, precedent. These words served as guiding lights for what was to come. He recalled the fleeting expressions of Alexander Stubb. The Finnish president had attempted to maintain his composure, but a faint blush and nervous fidgeting betrayed his facade when confronted with uncomfortable truths. In politics, victory doesn't always mean an outright win, Vladimir mused quietly. Sometimes, it's about provoking thought. A low rumble of an engine in the courtyard broke his concentration. A government car was departing, presumably carrying away a Finnish advisor who would begin crafting statements to address the pressing issues they had discussed. But addressing what was already evident was nearly impossible. Grabbing a glass of mineral water, he returned to the window. In the distance, the port lights flickered like distant stars, while ships sailed out and returned, a timeless dance, echoing centuries of shared history between neighbors. They may choose silence, Vladimir contemplated, yet deep down, they understand. Closing his notepad, he set aside his pen. Tomorrow would herald new meetings. But today he had accomplished something important. He had compelled the president of Finland to confront his own past. As dawn broke over Helsinki, a crisp chill permeated the air, and the city awoke slowly. Market stalls remained undisturbed, and the first lights flickered to life in office windows. In that moment, Helsinki shed its polished veneer, revealing an authenticity only the locals truly knew. Without an escort, Vladimir stepped out of the hotel, feeling the pulse of a city on the brink of engagement. As he strolled through the narrow streets of downtown, the wind whistled past, carrying the whispers of yesterday's conversations. It was as though the city itself was digesting the critical dialogue that had unfolded in the meeting rooms, a dialogue that resonated beyond mere politics. Each step resonated with a quiet confidence. Dressed in a buttoned coat, he moved through the crowd with an air of calm assurance, eyes cast not upon shop windows, but toward a horizon overflowing with possibilities. Then, he recalled the Finnish president's struggle, glancing nervously at the ground, his mind racing to formulate responses for the media's relentless queries. Vladimir, on the other hand, felt a sense of purpose. He had embedded a seed of doubt into Stubbs' mind. Were the decisions made based on historical perspectives, or was fear driving their choices? The notion hung in the air, heavy with implications. What if this moment could redefine their relationship? Suddenly, the streets seemed narrower, echoing with unasked questions. With his mind racing, he contemplated the fine line they walked, a balance between cooperation and contention, an intricate dance where each misstep could ripple into greater waves. In that tension-filled silence, Vladimir was acutely aware that one question loomed larger than all others: can history shape a future that is not bound by its past? And as he moved through the bustling center, he felt the weight of history pressing against him. Tomorrow, he would return to the negotiating table, knowing that even the smallest shifts in perception could lead to monumental transformations. In the quiet corridor of a hotel, the soft glow of the lights contrasted against the careful footsteps of watchful guards. Vladimir Rostislavovich found himself deep in thought about the earlier discussions. Seated by the window, he held a pen, jotting down reflections on paper, allowing each handwritten stroke to encapsulate the day's tension. Words swirled in his mind: Kekkonen, Mannerheim, history, geography, Germany, precedent, each a beacon for the challenges ahead. He recalled the fleeting expressions of Alexander Stubb. The president of Finland had tried to keep his cool, yet a fleeting blush and nervous gestures revealed his discomfort when faced with hard truths. In political games, Vladimir mused, victory isn't always about winning, it's about stirring the pot of thought. A distant engine rumble interrupted his contemplation, a government vehicle taking away an advisor who would begin drafting statements to confront the harsh realities discussed. However, grappling with what was all too clear felt nearly impossible. Pouring a glass of mineral water, he returned his gaze to the port. Lights flickered like stars in the distance as ships sailed, a harmonious ballet that echoed ages of intertwined histories. They may choose silence, he thought, but beneath it, they understand the shared past. With a decisive flick of his notepad closed, he laid down the pen, aware that his subtle provocations had compelled the Finnish president to reflect on his governance and legacy. As dawn broke over Helsinki, a cool breeze swept through the waking city. Market stalls remained innocent in their stillness, and office windows began to sparkle with life. In this moment, Helsinki shed its glossy surface, revealing an authenticity known only to its locals. Stepping out of the hotel without an escort, Vladimir felt a pulse of readiness from a city poised for engagement. Walking through the narrow streets of downtown, the wind whistled by, carrying remnants of yesterday's vital exchanges. The city seemed to process the weight of the significant dialogue from earlier, echoing its deeper implications beyond the political arena. Each step exuded quiet confidence. Cloaked in a buttoned coat, he navigated the throng with a calm assurance, eyes not on shop displays but fixated on horizons rich with potential. He remembered the Finnish leader's turmoil, constantly glancing downward, grappling with thoughts about his public statements, desperate to appease relentless media scrutiny. In that contrast, Vladimir felt his own sense of resolve. He had planted a seed of doubt in Stubbs' mind. Were the choices ahead founded in historical awareness, or were they driven by fear? That notion lingered heavily around him. What if this pivotal moment could reshape their diplomatic relationship? As the streets seemed to close in, the air crackled with unanswered questions. His thoughts raced as he pondered the delicate balance they were engaged in, between collaboration and contention, a precarious dance where missteps could generate overwhelming consequences. In that charged silence, one towering question loomed over everything: could history carve a future free from the shadows of its past? With each stride through the bustling heart of the city, he felt the formidable weight of history pressing him forward. Tomorrow, he would again enter negotiations. Each small shift in perception today held the potential to spark momentous change tomorrow.